I'm Angela Kelly Robeck, host of the Empowered Principal Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Teaching While Queer is a podcast for 2S LGBTQ+ educational professionals to share their experiences in academia. Hi, I'm your host, Brian Stanton, a theater pedagogue and educator in New York City, and my goal is to share stories from around the world from 2S LGBTQ+ educators. I hope you enjoy Teaching While Queer. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teaching While Queer. I am your host, Brian Stanton. Today, I have the honor to speak with Ed Sperin. Hi, Ed. How are you doing?
Hi there. How are you? Nice meeting you.
It's so nice to meet you. I'm excited for our time today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you identify within the community and your work in education?
Okay, yes. I'm older, so I identify as a gay man. And kind of old school, I guess. So I feel like there's the old generation and the new generation. So I'm learning about the new generation and representing the older generation at times. Born in Connecticut, I had a situation at 16 where I was coming home from school and someone was robbing my parents' home and they attacked me. I was stabbed, my face was beaten, and it was a very traumatic situation. I was very shy and quiet, the fat little kid hiding my homosexuality. This situation, which was not a gay bashing, but just an unfortunate situation, kind of opened me up to not be shy anymore and really started my journey to be out of the closet and discover myself, both as a gay man and just as a person, because I was just shy and closeted for my years. This happened at 16. So with the reconstruction of my face and taking voice lessons to learn how to breathe again, I was breathing from my diaphragm and learning how to sing. I always wanted to be in show business, but was too shy. So graduated in high school in 81 and immediately got on that train and went straight to New York, lived right in the Greenwich Village in Jane Street, right in the heart of it all. And I dove into homosexuality with both feet. So I was an openly gay man, very proud of it, and working in theater as an actor. It was a double whammy because it was the rejection of being a gay man and not being, the handsome, good-looking guy, but the fat, funny one. So going to auditions being rejected, and then also too within the gay community, learning about myself, entering my adulthood, and the negative reactions there, living in the AIDS epidemic 80s in New York City. So there was a lot of negativity on top of me. I learned that acting wasn't my thing, and I was better suited to writing and directing. And so that's where it kind of led me into teaching, being a teacher and teaching acting and teaching directing. Later on in 1991, I ended up getting a job in San Francisco at the PWA Theater. So that really connected my two passions of working in the gay community, the HIV community, and teaching and directing. It was a wonderful job. Later on in 94, I left California and moved here to Florida, where I've been for 30 years, 3 decades. And so since then, I've just been so active in my community, in many different aspects, in many different genres, the leather community, the drag community, the bear community, all of them, connecting each one and making sure we all connect with one another. My years of community service and education led me to be the director of the World AIDS Museum and Educational Center. So a group of us started it. After 4 years of raising the money, we opened the doors. And then for 6 years, I was the executive director there, giving tours. We would go into the schools and educate students on the situation. We had galleries and art exhibits, educational programs. my favorite thing in the world was when these. Every time I tell it, I get very emotional because to have that yellow school bus pull up to the World AIDS Museum and have these kids get out of the bus on a class trip, and for me to sit there and just give them a tour and tell them our story, and it was just the brightest moment of my entire life. Things changed there, and I left the museum. And so now I work for Broward Health, the large medical conglomerate here, clinics and hospitals. And so there I educate in HIV as well. I do PrEP. I'm still very involved in the community. So I do things on my own in the community. And with Broward Health, I do a lot of HIV education to Covenant House, to runaway teens, still in the high schools and teaching. And here in Fort Lauderdale and Broward County, we have the Gay and Lesbian Community Center. And we have a wonderful Gay and Lesbian Community Center. It's 5 acres of land and buildings. And on that building, we have a 4-story senior housing development. It was just built 3 years ago. And I'm there. So I'm so gay, I live at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center. My front door is that. So it's a wonderful life of just being involved in the community 24/7 and living in the heart of it. And I never chose teaching. It kind of chose me to educate my community and be a mentor.
I think that's so beautiful because so much of what you talked about is necessary. The school buses pulling up and learning about HIV and AIDS from people who actually experience it, as opposed to like what you can see on the media, which is just so angry all the time. And it's coming from the wrong sources. Like, I do feel like gay men in the 80s justifiably needed to have anger. It's the anger against the gay men that I'm like, yo, these people are dying and you're angry and just spreading so much hate. And like, I grew up, I was born in the 80s, and so I grew up in the 90s, coming out of just seeing all of this stuff as a kid that was happening in New York and San Francisco and whatnot. And like, that was it. When I came out, my parents told me that they're worried I'm going to get HIV or AIDS and die. And like, that was the only route that there was for a person like me or a person like us, was to get AIDS and die. And so the work that organizations like yours did to kind of help remove the stigma, I mean, it's still not gone, but like, you really did a lot of work to horrible like reality that was lived in the 80s, to make it, I guess, safer for us. So thank you. I don't know where I was going with all that, but thank you.
In the pre-questionnaire, one of the questions, and I forget which one it was, but I think that kind of makes me feel the difference between the older community and the new generation is fear. As a 23-year-old man, I went to bed and had sex with a man, and it was a life and death situation, and you were aware of it at that exact moment, and you made life and death choices right then and there on the bed. And that's what's not part of the new generation. Oh, if I get HIV, I'll just take a pill. And we can talk to her blue in the face about the fears back then, but the young generation never really truly understands the fear. Just being gay and walking down the street and could get gay bashed. That fear. I think all of our decisions as an older generation were based in fear. Fearful for telling our parents, fearful of our bosses finding out. So now when they make these choices, am I gay? Where do I work? Who do I sleep with? That fear is not attached to them.
I think that's so fair. And I live in the cusp, right? Like, I'm between the generations. And so I had that fear when I was younger. And then now, as, an almost 40-year-old adult, one, I'm just happy to be here representing, the 40-year-old queer people, because when I was a kid, they didn't really exist. Because, there was a whole generation of men that died. And that stuff I find incredibly heartbreaking. Like, I cannot watch anything that has to deal with the AIDS epidemic without like feeling hollow for a couple of days. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a very empathic person and I feel lots of things, or like part of me feels like we each share in the trauma that happened before us. Like I think about things that happen in history and I feel the trauma, and I don't take ownership of it, but like it feels like when I say things like that could have been me, it then becomes real for me.
Well, it is that exact word right there, trauma. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, trauma. I'm 60 years old. I'm 20 years HIV positive. Boy, do I have trauma. And I fix that and I heal that by doing and giving back. And a lot of times I talk like living in the village, in the middle of it, the war. I saw many men die in my hands, around me. And so the amount of men that I saw pass away was more than my father in the Korean War seeing men pass away in war. I do believe that gay men have that same trauma that our fathers had in going to war, Korean War, Vietnam War, whatever it might be. Those men, our fathers, had trauma from war related to death and grieving. And so do we. But it's not looked at that way because we were having fun and going to bars. So they don't look at it as a war, but to me it was a war.
Yeah, I agree with you there, because if you look at the media from the time period, there is a political war happening. And I've gone on this tangent on other episodes. I used to want to be a historian, and my big thesis was that we are still fighting the Civil War. It just changed venues. And that's one of those venue changes. It went to the media, and we have conservative people saying that like these people are wrong because they're different and let them die. And that kind of stuff I think is so inhumane, and for people to be like, America is great and wonderful. And I'm just like, look at the generations and centuries of American leaders being like, it's okay to let those people die.
Yeah, and I feel like I go out to a bar, and the other day, and I just past 2 years I got diabetic neuropathy. So I go out to a bar. I needed to sit down. I'm old. I couldn't stand that long, and I sit there and I watch. And every single time I'm in an area like that, a bar or a situation, I look around how many other men are my age, because my generation was completely wiped out. If there are any of us left, they have illnesses, they stay home, they're married, they don't go out that much. So it's very rare to see people my age out in a bar. It really, truly is. And I count and I see how many 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. And so the 50s and 60s and older are not there. They're just not there. And so there's a lot younger generation. And that is, people just don't see that demographic part of it and are missing out on a lot of education. Sometimes community centers or certain groups, once in a blue moon, will have like, oh, let's get the old guard and the new guard and get them together and have a talk session. And they do that so infrequently that it really should be done a lot more.
Absolutely. And I think the thing for me is like, I understand also because I'm a history person, right? Like I love learning, and I love learning about the past and learning from the past. So I am sitting there going, I would love to sit down. This is one of my favorite things about having this podcast, is that sometimes I sit down with people who are 20 years older than me, and I get to learn and absorb from you and folks like you. And it's just so fascinating to me. And I honestly feel like it's what makes me a better person, because I get to like absorb and get a new perspective on things that I only saw from the outside. Like I can only tell you what I saw on the news as a teenager. I can only tell you what I saw on the news as a child. I don't have experience on the front lines, because I do agree that it was a war.
Yeah.
And what drives me crazy now is listening to conservative politicians being like, this is a new phenomenon of of queer people being in existence, because like, where are all the older queer people? Well, you let them die. Like, did you forget that you let them die? Like, that stuff just, oh, it really is the thing that will ignite my anger quicker than anything else right now.
I think what angers me more is not so much the outside ignoring us or letting us die, but our own people within our own community do that. The shaming, um, being HIV positive and on the dating sites. Oh, are you clean? Well, of course I am. I took a shower this morning.
I
What they mean
hate that
is,
phrase so much.
yeah. So I know Jack McEnroth had a wonderful campaign once. You get a little rubber ducky and take a picture of you in the shower with the rubber ducky to break away that stigma about I'm not dirty, I'm clean. In fact, I'm healthier than anyone else around because I go to the doctor every 3 months and you take care of yourself. And nowadays, what in my education of HIV, U equals U, undetectable is uninfectious. Not only do like regular people did not know this, I find people who are doctors and nurses in the business don't know this. And it's a funny anomaly because, I think every gay man should be educated on certain things, and one of them is U equals U, undetectable is uninfectious. And we find it an unusual anomaly here in Broward County, being the second largest gay community next to West Hollywood, that gay men are more comfortable here in Broward County having sex with other gay men who are HIV positive. Because if that person's negative, I say, are you negative? Did you get a test? Oh, yeah, I had a test 3 weeks ago. Are they lying? So you still have that little chip on your shoulder, that little doubt. Are they really negative? Are they lying to me? But if you go to an HIV positive person and say, hey, I want to have sex with you, are you HIV positive? Sure, I'm undetectable. I'm on medication for so many years. So there's not that fear of having sex with them. And in Broward County, there's a comfort level about being only because of the education and the knowledge that we possess here. Yet within gay community here, Wilton Manors and Wilton Drive, we have that information. They're popping PrEP like it's Tic Tacs. Then 2 miles away where I work in the lower income neighborhood and the Black community, they're afraid to get a test. And if you have South Florida's epicenter of HIV new infections for the past 15 years. So why has it been decreased in San Francisco, LA, and New York, yet it's still prevalent here, and the numbers keep going up every year and year? Well, stigma and fear. For example, if you have the three fears and three stigmas of being gay, Black, and poor, 1 out of every 2 gay Black men is HIV positive in Broward County. Why? Fear. We have to erase the stigma and fear, and education will cure this disease.
1 and 2 is then nationwide as well, because I actually just read a play for my queer theater class that is called 1 and 2, and it is these 2 men on stage, 2 young Black men, and the crux of the story is that, like, we just told the story about this young Black man finding out that he has AIDS and living with AIDS, or HIV, and that's me. That is my story, and 1 and 2 of us, that is their story. And so I think that is a shocking ratio that we can honestly do more work with, because it really is just a matter of destigmatizing. And I don't know what it's like in Florida, but I know in other states that I've lived in that, like, access to PrEP can be, like, with the exception of like consistently needed to go to the doctors, it can be relatively easy and can be incredibly affordable to get it. And so it's just like, what are the steps that we need to take as a community to help our, Black gay brothers to be able to protect themselves and kind of work past the stigma that is Black, gay, and HIV positive, or poor is what you mentioned. Sorry. And so I don't know, I'm here with you on that. Like as a teacher, like my whole thing is equity for everyone. And I study lots of things about how to make my classroom equitable for everyone. And it doesn't matter how poor you are. It doesn't matter what your race is or your gender identity. My goal is that you can be in my space and you will thrive.
Yeah. Well, I come from the old days. So we had Butch and Femme. We had Butch and Femme. You were either Rock Hudson or Liberace. You only had two choices, really. And I still live that way. You're either Butch or Femme. So today, with all this 50 Shades of Gay and all these different choices and 18 letters in the LGBTQ alphabet, it's so confusing, and so you have to make all these different choices. And with, for example, relationship or boyfriend. So I do this exercise a lot in my education. I have 20 people in the room. Here's a piece of paper. Write down the word boyfriend or partner. You'll get those pieces of paper back. You'll get 20 different definitions because everybody has a different dictionary definition and they'll vary. So this is a great exercise to take a word like boyfriend or partner, and different things like that, and you'll get 20 different definitions. Now, one of the things I always do in my education is, give me the definition of stigma. Nobody, no adult, no child, no young adult, no one has ever given me the definition of stigma. No one knows it. And I've spoken to educated people. They have an idea what it might be. They can kind of understand it if it's presented in front of them. But no one understands the definition of stigma. No one can put it on paper with words. And that always baffled me. So that is another great exercise to look into. Until you can fight stigma, you got to understand what it is and know the definition of it first. So it's all about that education and that outreach that really boggles my mind. What people know and don't know. Another piece that I want to give you that's really interesting. So you're very familiar with Will and Grace, correct?
Yeah, it was the only pop culture reference I had as a kid.
Yeah, good example. So at your age, you had Will and Grace. And we had Butch Femme there, and we had a little bit of different style. How many years was that TV show on? 10, 12, something like that, in both generations. Hours and hours of gay and lesbian programming from Will and Grace. Not once did they ever mention PrEP or HIV on any episode. And when I tell people that, they are stymied by that. Like, really? Watch every single minute of that show. And there was an opportunity for them to really put it out there. Will goes on a date, dates a guy, the guy's on PrEP. Why couldn't they put that there? It boggles my mind, and I want to shake them and find out why they never did that. It really boggles my mind.
Yeah, and I think there's something about that, like where queer stories aren't being written by queer people. And I think that was very dominant in that time period as well. It's like, let's throw this queer story here because we're trying to attack a new demographic, right? And so nowadays we're getting more queer stories written by queer people. And so we do see some of the things that are stigmatized coming to light. But they're not always in the greatest way. Like, I don't know if you watch American Horror Story, but there was an American Horror Story New York season where literally a man in leather hood and harness represented AIDS and walked around New York City like Molotov cocktailing an entire bar as a visual representation of what it was like for entire groups of people to be wiped out by this disease. And like this person would show up and like strangle an individual person in their house and whatnot. And so it was like a very graphic representation of what it was like to kind of put it in terms and to make it a horror story, right? But the problem is it already was. Like, it was a horror story on its own, and that's why I appreciate things like Pose, which kind of addressed it in a real human way.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to sensationalizing it like was done in American Horror Story.
Yeah, I feel that a lot, not just in that, but within our own culture. the leather part of it is we're the bad seeds. And I get that. I'm very involved in the leather community as well. I'm a former Mr. Drummer and gone to IML many times. And so sometimes the leather community is looked upon badly because they are sexually active, they are sexually exploratory and comfortable with it, where some gay people are not comfortable with their sexuality. Yet, what they don't know about the history is, so they use that as that dark image, but what they don't know is back in the old days, in the 80s, yes, the leather community was the most sexually active, and they were the most devastated sector of our community. The majority of that community died that was part of that community because of the sexual activity. What they don't know is the few men that were left were the ones that started GMHC, that started ACT UP, that really formed the committees and the groups to get things going and get the word out there. And they forget that. I remember my first kind of connection with the leather community as a young man was Bob Wilson. And his partner passed away, was a bartender on a Christopher Street. And in like 1984, 85, I'm in his apartment above Bilardo's on Christopher Street sewing AIDS quilts. And so there was a couple of Leathermen there, our token lesbian, and we sat there and drank beer and sold quilts, but it was mostly those leather guys. And in the leather community tradition, if you were not a Leatherman back then until you were given a piece of leather, it was like, here you are part of our neighborhood. Same way your grandmother passed down a quilt to the daughter, it was that in the leather community, a piece of leather. So you wore that leather, and Bob gave me a piece of his lover's a shirt that is very dear to me. It's in the closet. I've never worn it, and it hangs in the closet with all my other clothes. So there was these traditions and feelings and this close camaraderie that people don't understand. Once again, back to life and death. But in these deep situations that happened back then, it just boggles my mind that media, television, film doesn't show any of what went down then properly. That movie Cruising, that was a whole other story. But now even today, what we have on TV that represents gay and lesbians is really very small. After the AIDS epidemic, there was a few HIV things. There's only been about 4 HIV plays on Broadway. After that, it was other things like that were related, that had gay characters. But nowadays, it's passé. It's not trendy. So you don't see gay characters on Broadway, theater, film, or TV anymore. It's not trendy. We've fought to be accepted. Now that we're accepted, we blend it in. People don't see us because we are part of it now.
Yeah, and I think that the representation is expanding because, for instance, like right now on Broadway, Anne Juliet has non-binary character. Some Like It Hot. I was like avidly against seeing Some Like It Hot because I just remember the old movie and I thought it was going to be incredibly bigoted. Because the old movie is literally just 2 men dressing in drag so that they can escape, death. And it turns out in the Broadway that this person who dresses in drag to escape death ends up finding that they have a non-binary identity. And so I think that it's expanding a little bit because there's also like non-binary characters in Kimberly Akimbo and Shucked, which I'm excited to see. It's about corn and I have no idea what it's about.
Corn.
But I think that it's expanding because I think you're absolutely correct in that, like, okay, gay people are fine now. And so like they're trying to expand representation, which is great, except for I agree with you in the sense that I put together an entire catalog of like queer plays during queer theater class this summer. And you're absolutely correct in that, like, there is a lack of queer storyline that's happening. And I have like different categorizations on my database. And one of them is like, we don't see queer family, like that future that actually is my present of being a queer parent doesn't exist in representation other than like passing through stories like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. One of the queens is a parent, and that's it. Like, it's a sub story to a bigger picture. And we don't see, there's a classification that is just AIDS plays, and 9 times out of 10 with those plays, it's really just about an outside perspective. Like, you're seeing this person from their parents' eyes or their doctor's eyes or whatnot. You're not seeing the person from their own experiences. And so I think there's a long way to go in entertainment to truly provide representation. Because I think about like high schools and how the Laramie Project is a huge play that a lot of people want to push for. There are 0 queer people in the Laramie Project. It is a play that is about the aftermath of someone dying who was queer.
Yeah.
And yet that is supposed to be the queer representation in theater, and it's not, because there are no queer people in it.
I saw a wonderful show about the homos of Hitchcock, and how and I don't know if you've seen it, but you really should.
No, I'll check it out.
It explores these gay men that he employed and represented. I forget what the name of the movie is, but there's this one movie where these 2 guys that live together have a dinner party, and they kill somebody and put their body in this like chest, and then put the table on it, and then the folks have dinner, and it's really very gay. But
I'm starting to see like where Richard O'Brien got that scene from a Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah. So back then, I think it's wonderful to kind of look back on those kind of things. Remember, Liberace, he was gay than anything, yet everyone accepted him. Why? Because his talent, he was such a talented pianist, his talent overshadowed his gayness. And the ladies liked him. And then the straight guy go, well, he's a little flouncy, but he's a really damn good pianist. They may not have liked him for being gay, but they applauded him on his talent. So I think we've all learned from that. Show who you are. Show your talents. I don't think you should just go out there and just wear the rainbow and be gay. Be who you are inside before you put the rainbow colors on the outside, and show them who you truly are. And then make a statement. But the homos homos of Hitchcock is a great one. I'm going to butcher his name, but there's another internet YouTuber guy, Matt Bomber, and he does some wonderful. Yeah, I think I've watched all of his stuff. He's really great. I just finished a theater project called The Y Chronicles, and what this was is I got grant funding from my theater company, and I had 8 men and an HIV workshop. Standard HIV long-term survivor workshop. Tell your stories every week, but then as you tell it, we journaled their stories. After we journaled those stories and put them on paper, they handed in those journals to me, and then I wrote down. I wrote a play, but it really was copy and paste of their true stories. So last weekend at my theater, we presented the Y Chronicles, which was just a stage reading, a collection of these monologues. These actors were phenomenal. They sat there and read the monologues, young, old, telling the true stories of survival. And some were funny, some were sad. After every monologue, the audience cried and laughed and applauded. And I've done this type of project before. And so what's really wonderful about this, A, yes, it was great theater. But B, we're using this as an educational tool. So that way, once I fix this now a little bit and do some little editing, this project can be now sent down to not theater companies, but HIV resource centers who can do a one-night-only event. I'm so tired of PowerPoints. If you give me a person who just reads the PowerPoint, I'm ready to slap them. But something like this can educate, because after you have this monologues, we present it, you hire some actors, you have them go up there, and then afterwards you start the Q&A. This is what sparks the audience to ask the proper questions, the important questions. So things like this, theater for me cannot just be entertaining and fun, it also can be a huge educational tool And for me, I use artwork and theater to educate about my community and about HIV.
I love that. I'm a huge fan of edutainment. So I'm right there with you. I, as an educator, try to tie um, every one of the scripts that I choose for school back to what the core values are for the school. So that way I can show my students what it means to like live your values as opposed to memorize the definition of a value.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that we get to. One, I want your definition of what a stigma is.
Oh,
You threw it out there, so I'm throwing it back.
All right. Stigma is fear. You can put it into that one simple word. Stigma is fear. It's fear of unknowing, not knowing. So stigma is the fear of not knowing something, not being educated on it. And then you have a negative response towards that because you don't have the fear and the knowledge of it. So if someone is not educated, they're fearful of, flying. So you're afraid to fly. Well, let's get you on a plane. Let's take a couple of flights. And now that you understand how an airplane works, how flight works, you erase that fear, erase the stigma. So many times in my education, I get people not to know me, but to know the material. And I'll give you a couple examples. So this is AIDS candy. Have you ever seen this?
No.
So for 40 years, from the 1940s to the 1980s, AIDS-reducing candy was sold on stores all over the world. It was a little chocolate chew with some drugs in it, made you poop, made you lose weight. Now, in 1984, when AIDS became AIDS, this company went bankrupt because the TV commercial says, "I'm so glad I got AIDS." And the company went bankrupt. And all the product just had to be dumped in the ocean. But if people were educated and the fear and the stigma, okay, come on. You're really going to get AIDS from eating a piece of chocolate? In 1984, that's how stupid they were. Now we know better today. But
like the toilet seat thing, like
you're
gonna get AIDS from a toilet seat. Because I remember that vividly when I was younger.
Yeah. And so this is another one I use in my education. So this is the 10-year ribbon. And this is one of the art pieces at the museum. The artist, it's called the 10-year ribbon because these artists saved all of his HIV medicine bottles for 10 full years. So it's 417 bottles glued into a 5-foot ribbon. Each bottle costs $800 for a 30-day supply. This sculpture represents $336,000 worth of medication in 10 years. I know a lot about this because I'm the artist and I made this. So this is the presentation I would give at the museum with this piece of artwork. And once people know the facts and know what's the information, and then I really reveal myself, they're comfortable because I built up a trust. So getting rid of stigma is getting rid of that fear. And how do you get rid of that fear? You have to build up a trust. And then you have to educate them. So once again, the subject of HIV and AIDS is a difficult one. So using music, Freddie Mercury. How many people know Freddie Mercury music? So talk about that. Tell me what you enjoy about his music, everything you know about him. And then the movie, did you like the movie? So I get them interested in something, build up that trust, and get them interested in something they like. Now, it's not shown in the movie, but in reality, Freddie Mercury said to his manager and says, "Look, I have this virus. I need to make a press conference." So he had a press conference, announced to the world he had AIDS. He died the very next day after that press conference. And no one knows that, and it's not in the movie, but that's fact. Have you ever seen the TV show Gunsmoke?
No.
So it's a TV show that ran for 25 years. Amanda Blake was the actress that played Miss Kitty, who ran the saloon. She died of AIDS. Her husband had prostitutes and infected her, and he died and she died. So especially with my parents and the generation, I connect to them who knows TV in the 40s and 50s and 60s and say, so you have to find something to connect to them. So I listen to the student or the adult. I found out what they know and don't know, and I try to connect with them with music, with TV, with artwork. And Keith Haring, they may know Keith Haring art. So connect with them on some level, find out what they know and don't know, hit them with something they're familiar with, and then throw the HIV/AIDS story in there. And they go, wow, I didn't know that. It creates a light bulb thing. So back to your original question, stigma is fear. And how do you erase fear? By getting them educated and interested in the subject and how it affects them, whether they be infected or affected. And it's as simple as that, really. Fear, stigma is fear, and we need to erase that fear by education. Education will erase the fear.
Ed, you are like the king of segue because you answered my second question in that. And so I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case there's anything else that pops up. But talking about education, like what would it look like if a school were to come talk or you go present at a school? What are the things that you're hitting on in the school that you want to make sure that the kids take away?
Well, so a good example is, Black History Month. So they'll list all the Black history people, Harriet Tubman, Carver, the George Washington Carver. So you'll list all those people, and it's standard in a lot of the schools, the same thing over and over again. Yet what they will eliminate in that Black History Month is Bayard Rustin. They'll talk about Martin Luther King, but they don't have a clue who Bayard Rustin is. And, for the audience, he wrote some of the speeches and was his second-hand man to Martin Luther King. So I think that if we can get on that same level that Black History Month shows those people, and that in June, at Gay History Month, that we show our gay ancestors and show the history and the importance and the contributions that they made. So that is, I don't know why I got off on that tangent, but so it's that level playing field. Some people still have prejudice against Black people, but they understand that, in February there's Black History Month and we have these people. But wow, to have that same level of education and representation in June, it's going to take us another 10 or 20 years, unfortunately, I feel.
So I think that they actually, we have Pride Month in June, and they actually created a National LGBTQ History Month in October. And the reason for that is that most schools are out in June. And so this is an opportunity where everybody can kind of be involved. It's in the middle of the school year. So right now, as we do this interview, it's October 1st. Schools have this opportunity to do this. And I remember my second year teaching, someone came up to me and they're like, we want to do some things for LGBTQ History Month in October. And they asked my advice on all the things, that everything got vetoed. And it was wild to me because this wonderful person, she is still a friend that I'm connected with, despite the fact that I haven't worked there in a year and whatnot. But she came up to me and she's like, I want to do things on Marsha P. Johnson and I want to do things on Sylvia Rivera, but I can't because of prostitution and drugs. Literally those two things are so stigmatized that we couldn't do anything, not talk about anything with that person and how they influenced the community on a whole. And so then you're left with wonderful people like Harvey Milk, but even then we were the school district wouldn't allow us to kind of celebrate that. We did one thing that I feel is incredibly brave. I was the host of, not a host, but I was a producer of a talk show that happened once a week where students talked about things at the school that were important. And we did a National Coming Out Day episode where the students received in their Instagram inboxes coming out stories from other students and teachers in the school and just read them and read their stories. And it was the only thing of significance that we were allowed to do because there is so much stigma associated with just being a queer person.
Yeah. Well, remember, if there is this thing in October and all schools across the country are supposed to engage in October, well, another state like California may embrace that. But remember, I live in Florida where they don't say gay. So,
Yep. And I'm talking about Texas, where they are basically just copying Florida's playbook at the moment.
Yeah. And so that is, I think, my challenge is we need to, I would love to have that same level playing field. I think one of the big ways to help this and get around this, I feel very strongly about this, is that parents and people who have kids and people in my sector who are single and don't have kids, we need to support two things. We need to support GLASM, the Gay Lesbian Teachers Association. They exist. So many people don't know that they exist. And we need to get behind them because they need allies. They need our support. They're doing it all alone. And as you know, you may have so many teachers that participate that and some that are still afraid to participate in that. They're afraid to lose their jobs because of the stigma. So us as a community, as a giant whole, we need to support GLASM. And we also need to support any gay and lesbian clubs that may exist. If there's a gay and lesbian after-school program, support them, do whatever we can, give them money, education, whatever we can provide. Another good example is here in Florida, in Broward County. We have a lot of schools, maybe 50, 60 high school level schools. We have about 7 or 8, which we call the priority schools, which may be in poor, Black, low-income neighborhoods. So I can go to the Christian Academy, and they don't want to hear about condoms. But we have a school here, and I give them big kudos because they're wonderful, Blanchely High School in Pompano Beach. We've had a program with them called Band-Aids, just like the chess club or the drama club. It's called Band-Aids, and these kids go there and talk about HIV and learn from us. And then they're passing out condoms in the cafe. We as adults can't get into the schools a lot. We can educate them, and then those students can educate the community. Passing out condoms in the cafeteria at lunchtime is huge. And they've been doing it almost 17, 18 years at this one school. So we find certain schools which have the need and the understanding, and other schools that have that roadblock. And you have to understand sometimes you never get past that roadblock. So support GLASM, support whatever student GLBT agency we can, and they need allies such as us as much as anything.
Absolutely. And I'll put the link to the website for the Gay Lesbian Teacher Association inside the show notes for this episode. I'm also a huge proponent of GLSEN because they provide resources for Gender and Sexualities Association, which is the new phrase for GSA, formerly known as Gay Straight Alliance. And so these organizations are so pivotal because they're the ones that can help in the classrooms. And you kind of, so you're so good at this.
Well, thank you.
You touched on my final episode, or my final question of the episode.
One real quick thing though, in the teacher association, what do you think the percentages of teachers that are afraid to join GLASM? 5%?
Oh, I imagine 10%? That's like 80-90%.
Really? See, that's, people don't understand that. Yeah, 80-90%. There are teachers out there that are not participating for fear of the stigma of being associated with that. Crazy.
It's funny because NEA, the National Education Association, has like a LGBTQ cohort that I'm a part of and whatnot, but it's like a newsletter without real actionable resources. And so having other organizations and other options is so necessary. And so, yeah, look in the show notes, folks. They will be there. See if they can be helpful for you. And I'm sure that you can join and still have a level of anonymity if you need to. Because in this kind of turbulent time, safety is key. You shouldn't do anything that's going to put you in danger. So as I mentioned, you kind of touched on my final question that I always ask, which is like, how can school environments be more inclusive for LGBTQ students? Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
How can they be more inclusive? Well, like I said, even just to do what I ask, to get to know those gay and lesbian groups, the GSAs, and Glasson, even that's very difficult because, who are you? You're an outsider. Everyone's a little guarded. So take it easy, take it slow. Just let them know that you're there to help out. And sometimes, just having a little cash or here's a place, pay for that bus to get to the World AIDS Museum. Pay for that bus to get them to the museum in your town. That's something you're helping them out, so that's really helpful. And yeah, it's hard to get into the schools. And like anything, I feel you have to give people the direction. So, for example, if you have substance abuse issues or drinking, and so, well, I'm not saying you are, but here is a piece of paper. This is who to call. This is where they have classes and AA meetings. So they may not go to that meeting in the next week or next month, maybe 2 years from now, but they find that piece of paper there. So just get the word out there that, for example, like I said, there's a 5-acre campus here. If there's a gay and lesbian community center in your town, let them know. And if it's not in your town, let them know, like, for example, in Miami, they can come up here to our community center. If you live in rural Kissimmee, you can drive to Orlando. Cocoa Beach in Melbourne has to drive an hour and a half to go to Orlando, but do it. You can drive from the Cocoa Beach Space Coast area to get to Orlando to a gay and lesbian community center and a gay and lesbian community if there's not one in your neighborhood. Unfortunately, that's what happens is in rural and suburban areas, there's just not that access to it. But once again, today in this day and age, you have people such as yourself and the internet and groups. So join. I mean, you can join an AA group online. Well, then join a gay and lesbian talk group like this online. Get involved in a chat like this and get to know your gay and lesbian community. If it has to be like this through internet and through video calls, so be it. Make it happen. Do something.
And for those of you who are in rural areas, there's a wonderful podcast that's based out of Kentucky that is called Weathering Rainbows, and it is literally geared toward people who are in rural areas who don't have an outlet near them. And they talk about everything from, like, they had me on the podcast and I talked about education. They had other people on the podcast talking about doing drag or coming out, or how to keep yourself safe in turbulent environments and whatnot. And so there are some online resources available if you can't get to those spaces. And I just wanted to share one because they've been very friendly with our podcast. So to wrap things up, you have the opportunity to ask me a question. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over the mic to you.
Ask you a question. Well, you are knowledgeable on a lot of different factors. So you are gathering all this kind of information from people such as myself and all the other educators. So you are gathering all this information other than paying it forward and spreading that word out through your podcast. What other avenues can you do to educate our community besides the podcast?
So I've been thinking about this a lot as I kind of figure out what the next chapter looks like for me. I just moved to a new city, and one of the things that I've always wanted to do is really be an advocate for the community. And the creation of this podcast was honestly because I didn't see queer educator voices anywhere. I didn't see our stories being told. And so for me, this was the opening of the door for advocacy. One of the things that I want to do in the future is to kind of transition this company, because I created the podcast as a company, into a nonprofit organization that then goes and supports LGBTQ educators and educational programs. There are things that happen that are specific to supporting LGBTQ students, which I think is fantastic. Where I find education lacking at the moment is in supporting teachers. And so I would want to create a fund that could help support teachers who are the LGBTQ advocate on their campuses. And they would have a grant application that they'd have to fill out, and a panel would be created to kind of decide how that's going to play out. But my goal is to be able to give back to the very community that I'm asking for information from. Because I do see that, especially in education, so much, rightfully so, goes to the students. But what I think is really lacking is this kind of support for educators, and it's why we see burnout, and it's why we see a teacher shortage, is because no one's investing in the teachers. And so I would want to be that resource where I can be an advocate for LGBTQ teachers, not only in amplifying their voices, but also in a fiduciary way to support their programs and the things that they're wanting to do on their schools.
Maybe in like a GoFundMe kind of thing where, yes, you might be raising money for these gay teachers, but if, let's say, a teacher needs a laptop, I have an extra laptop, let me send it to them. Or like I said, paying for buses. Hey, we want to take this bus trip to such and such. The bus is going to cost $350. Maybe someone will come along and just sponsor that. So
absolutely, all of those things.
Yeah.
And that is a goal of mine, is to create an online community. Eventually, I am assessing the new resources for my website, because the resource I'm looking at can allow me to host my podcast, but also have like a login community so that we're not inundated with hate, where people can log in, be a part of this community, and connect with each other. But also, it could be that stomping ground, that place where I can say, like, post your projects here, and then we'll try to connect sponsors to your projects. And so these are kind of like my 5-year goals for what teaching while queer can look like. Because I think that is really what's lacking, is a sense of community. And many teachers don't have like a teacher association, and in many states, like, having an official teachers association is illegal. And so this would be an opportunity to be able to provide community, and continue to support education and support teachers, and ultimately in supporting those teachers, we're supporting their students. So that's the dream.
Well, it's great. I mean, like I said, it's one step at a time. I learned years ago, a lot of my theater work has really helped me in education, listening and understanding other people. And an actress named Nancy Marchand told me many years ago, never be the best, always be better. And that related to education. Because if you're the best, you've won the Tony Award, you've hit the ceiling, and now you can't get any work because now you're the best actress. And as you know, Best Oscar, they have trouble getting work after they've won the Best Oscar. But if you're better, you can always get better. You can always get better. So with theater, it's always about educating and learning and growing. And, and teaching, things change. We used to use calculators. Now, laptops. So you have to kind of learn and grow with the times and change. So always just getting better and better and better is better than being the best.
I agree. It's almost like, for those of you who are pop culture reference people, it's almost like you want to be the Susan Lucci. You want to constantly be nominated because it means that you're good.
Yeah.
But because you're not the best, you still have room to grow.
Yeah.
And I love that, like, as an educator, as an academic, because I'm constantly like, as soon as I finish a degree, I'm like, what new thing can I learn now? So I'm constantly looking for ways to grow and learn. And so I think that is so important. Ed, I just wanted to say thank you for the wonderful conversation today. I appreciate that you came onto the podcast and shared a different side to education, and a side that's so important, which is the side of education that focuses on ending the stigma around HIV and AIDS. So I want to thank you so much for your work, and that you took your time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you very much. I had a great time.
Awesome. And thank you all for joining us on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Teaching While Queer. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Leave a review, and that would help out tremendously. You can also support the podcast by going to www.teachingwhilequeer.com and hit support the show. Thanks so much, and have a great day.